when you see the rising half, 15 years of your life, Saturn's going to be on the half that's rising. You have a rising half of your chart. The part of you is trying to project things and make things happen and get where you're coming from for your motivation and express it out into life. And for 15 years, Saturn's going to be on that side. So you're trying to express yourself and you're running into interference, you're running into delays, you're running into restrictions and challenges that are forcing you to become more disciplined or more real or more structured in its approach. So for 15 years, Saturn will be rising on the rising half of your chart. Then for 15 years, Saturn will be on the setting chart of your chart. So as you're trying to react to others or get response from others, Saturn limits or challenges, brings in restrictions or limitations, and you feel you're not growing as much, people aren't responding to you as much, and you need to get more, but you're having to work to try and figure out how to get more. So the Saturn on the rising side versus the setting side, I should have a special graphic, but I don't. But anyways, I'll try and make one later. But this is the first cat. When you're looking at a chart, you see the rising and the setting. When we do a planet in the sign, we see the rising and the setting side first. So your angles, you're seeing the midheaven IC, you see the rising side and the setting side. You're rising up to your midheaven. You're coming from your world up to the world to see what you can prove and do. And Saturn's on that side. You're just going to take an extra effort to do that, or you're going to be serious about doing that. That's for 15 years. And then for the next 15 years, you're going to be responding to people. You're going to be more running into difficulties of not getting the feedback or the response you want from people and trying to get more, having to work harder or make more of an effort to get that response. So the difficulties are responding to others for 15 years. And for the next 15 years, they're about projecting what you put out. These are 15-year phases of your life, very personal. But it's this general theme, it's distinctly there. But to see it to your behavior, we don't remember we don't always think right away like this. You have to start thinking, how you're projecting and how Saturn came in and blocked it. You'll get glimpses of this in the overview. We're not going to stay long on this, but the angle, the midheaven IC is measuring these two halves. It's a 15-year shift when Saturn goes across an angle. So between the rising and the setting, then you have when Saturn goes above the horizon, hits over to the ascendant, it goes below the horizon for 15 years, and then when it hits the descendant, it goes above the horizon for 15 years. We have two 15-year phases. One, the problems are below the horizon in your subjective world, in your personal world, in your inner being. The problems are inside yourself for 15 years. Getting yourself together, limiting yourself. When you're feeling limited in yourself, it's going to limit how much you're functioning. But when Saturn's above the horizon, you're going to run into challenges and difficulties in your functional social world. And the challenges will come from there, and you have to live up to it and try to see what you can do with what you've got. And the challenges are coming from outside rather than inside. Now, based on our chart, we can interpret the outer ones inwardly, the inner ones outwardly, depending where our planets are. We'll have our bias in terms of where our focus of interpreting our social functional realities and our personal growth. If you have your sun below the horizon, your subjective world and your personal world is more important than your lifestyle, and your personal things are more important than your status. The status is only a means to take care of your lifestyle. You can say that for anyone, but it's the lifestyle is more important, the personal depth. So when Saturn's below, it's going to be when Saturn's going to conjunct your sun, you're going to define your goals. These are going to put more emphasis on that side. When Saturn's if you have your sun below and Saturn's above, you're going to get your opposition during that phase. It's going to be a little more difficult to deal with the outer world than the inner world. But these are 15-year phases. For 15 years, Saturn's below your horizon. For 15 years, it's above. So by the time you spend 15 years above the horizon, and Saturn's starting to hit your ascendant, you start getting depressed. Why are you getting depressed? Because you're realizing you're just getting used to functioning out in the world. You got it together. It's not, and it's ending. You can't keep going that way. And it's going to take 15 years of working on yourself before you rise up again. Well, and you want to do it in a couple of months by nature. So there's a little adjusting your time, adjusting your sense of perspective from 2 months to 15 years. I'll never do that. Most of us don't even have plans for 2 years ahead. So, most people are living on their Mars cycle, 2-year cycle. So, or Jupiter, like we're going to get to these, but just when you're going through a change over one of these angles, it's shifting the balance of 15 years of the way you've seen your life. This is not a small adjustment. This is personal based on the moment you're born, the time you're born. And if you're within a degree or two, so within 5, if you know your time within 5 or 10 minutes, you're close enough that this is still going to work. Even if you got it within half an hour, you're going to be more or less within the same few months that this is happening to, and you're over the year, you'll have it within the 3 hits within more or less the same time. But it's nice when you have the exact time. You see these, you can really work these specifically. When is someone going to grow up? When are they going to get serious? When are they going to stop their bad habits? When are they going to start working hard? When are they going to start making an effort? When are they going to start doing something for themselves? When are they going to get real or get serious? And parental concerns, business concerns, when someone can take more responsibility, all these things are there for a kid who wants to grow up, who wants to take more responsibility. I don't want to deal with that. I want to just, but half of us, when we're younger, we do want to get older. It's only once we pass about 30, we don't want to be older anymore. We want to try and be younger, but there's still wanting to play and not be so responsible. So kids that are grow up and they have their Saturn aspect, heavy Saturn aspects, they have responsibility and have to grow up really early. They grow up and they're inhibited about their play. People that didn't, other kids grow up and they play all their young life, and they have to go up and say, you mean I have to pay rent for myself? You mean I have to take care of a kid? Things come in. So in this process of running into responsibility, of growing bones, of growing teeth, of maturing, of being from a kid to a teenager, to an adult, to a person, to responsibility, to maintaining family, to maintaining business, to growing in the world, this is Saturn. It's a normal, natural cycle. So we got to go around this, and I want to explain it. I'm just trying to think. The real starting point is the IC, but when we're working with our lives now, we often see when Saturn crosses the ascendant as the beginning. So I think we're going to start with Saturn at the ascendant. Okay, so for 15 years, or if it's Saturn's above your horizon, or be younger than that in your life, your responsibilities, your commitments, your efforts, your ambitions, your challenges, your problems, the difficulties are going to come from out in the world, Saturn above the horizon. And depending on how many years is above the horizon, for me, I had it in my 12th house, so it's 2 years Saturn was above the horizon. Some people have it their whole juvenile life, in which case, like, you don't have a chance to get control of these things till Saturn conjuncts the angle and you're conscious of it. Once you've gained the experience, once you know, see, as you know astrology, you're gaining these experiences. Once you've experienced Saturn over your ascendant, knowing astrology, thinking it, and experience it, that aspect becomes yours. And then once you've gone through it and grown it and dealt with it, you can be able to relate and help advise other people who've gone through that in experiential ways. If you haven't gone through that, you can only do the theory and suggested theory, which still can be very helpful, but it's very different when you've been around, once you've been an astrologer for 30 years, you've gone through a whole cycle of Saturn, you've gone through every bend, and you've worked through the lack of glamour, the growing up, the maturity on each process, the disenchantment, the reality check, all of these things they've built up and you've accumulated. So by the time you've been an astrologer 30 years, you really are the wise elder that can begin to advise people who are at other stages of this. And then there's people who don't even know astrology, but they're still growing up in these cycles, and you have the advice to them, but it becomes experiential every time you've experienced the aspect. If you haven't experienced an aspect, you can do the theory, you can read into it, and most people are using transits. So this is this planet, so it's going to mean this, to make the associations, and they talk about those associations, that's it. But they haven't necessarily got it experientially. It takes time to get that. And you have to watch it over time. This is Saturn. So if you had Saturn in your 7th house in your natal chart, heck, you're going to be 12 years old, 13 when you have this Saturn hitting your ascendant, where it starts to go below the horizon. So that's when you go into your problems become personal rather than social. So it means you're growing up your whole youth, or some portion of your youth. It means you're not in control of your responsibility. Your parents are deciding everything for you. You're having to do things, having to function in their world, and you're going along as if this is the reality. Well, that's fine. It can start early. You can start with Saturn below. At some time in your first 30 years, Saturn's going to hit your ascendant. But for 15 years before that, you've been affected by the environment you're in, with the parents you're in, with the authority figures you're in, with the sense of reality, with the pressures you're in. And so if you're young, you've been having to be more functional and be serious about your functioning and what you're doing. Saturn above the horizon, or what's not being done by parents, whether they're functional or dysfunctional, is there. And it's not until it hits the ascendant you realize that's not real anymore. They're not doing things for me. Yeah, an identity, I can't live like that. They're not, either parents move away or something happens or something breaks, and suddenly you get this identity crisis. Who am I? I'm not that anymore. So it can be a big rebellion. I'm depressed. I can't fit in there. I can't listen to my parents. I got to do something for myself. I got to get out of here. But you don't know what to do. You're functionally exhausted, but you're being challenged to grow personally because you can't change the function until you grow, until you've developed your depth. And it's going to take 15 years to develop this before you rise up in that functioning again. So this shift from, like, if you're older, you're out in the world, you're saying this can happen at any time. It depends on your time you're born. This is unique to the moment you're born, what your ascendant is and your angles are. So when this is, it becomes, I mean, this graph will really work it. This is, once you got this in you, it really gives you control of astrology, your ability to tune in and work with it responsibly. And not only think about how it's working, perceive it and observe whether someone's working with it positively or not. There's always 1,000 ways any specific thing can be dealt with, and it may be one or two things that it works. You may see one or two ways that it can work, and the other person shows you 5 or 6 others you never thought of. Or it may be all 10 or 20 or 500 things that are happening all at once, and they're all, or 10 or 20 anyways, and they're all happening at the same time. You don't know if it's going to be one thing or 20 things that's going to set off this identity crisis, but you know for sure this identity crisis is coming. And the identity crisis means you're falling out. You've built up, you've climbed the peak of your life, your status. And so if some people get the peak of status when they're 3, what's that? That's not going to show in the person's individuality. What it means is they're going to have their sense of importance to their parents, and their parents are together, where what's going on is going to have a strong influence on them at a peak where they got that status. And they learn to work with everyone else and do everything for everyone else and use the status. I'm there, I'm somebody, I'm using it. Okay, but it won't happen again. They won't get that status again for 30 years, till they're 35 or 36 or whatever. Wow, long time before you regroup to do a second take on these. So whatever happens at any angle carries over to the next and the next and the next, and they're all interwoven with each other. And often a complex that develops in one has to be dealt with the next. Or if it's not dealt with, it's carried on, the depression or the problems are carried on to the following one. And some people go through their whole life on the same complex. They don't deal with it. Whew. Okay, so whatever, we're riding along on our status and our influence between our status, our friends, people we know, what we accomplish, our successes, our failures, and suddenly we can't do this anymore. So if Saturn's up in your 10th house, it's 6 or 7. So when you go to school, you come out of the home, and all of a sudden you don't have the same influence, and everybody else is there, and it's identity crisis. You know how to use your parents and get around, but you don't know how to do things yourself. Oh my goodness. Okay,